Marjani was a woman unlike any other in the village of Vumbaka, kind, intelligent, and strong, with a heart that seemed to hold more love than the world could handle. She lived a humble yet joyful life by the riverbanks with her husband, Atembo, a brave and generous fisherman whose smile could light up even the darkest of days. He wasn't just a provider, he was her best friend and the soul of their little family. Together, they had a daughter, Zuri, a bright, lively 7-year-old who ran through the village with her mother's kindness and her father's fearless spirit. Though they didn't have riches or luxuries, they had something far more valuable: love, laughter, and dreams. Every morning, Atembo would leave at dawn, his fishing net slung over his shoulder, and Marjani would kiss him goodbye, wishing him a safe return. She spent her days weaving beautiful baskets, which she sold in the bustling village market. Her baskets weren't just practical, they were art, each one carefully crafted with vibrant patterns inspired by the river, the trees, and the sun. The villagers admired her skill, but they loved her even more for her heart. Marjani never turned away someone in need. If a widow couldn't afford food, Marjani shared her own. If a mother struggled to care for her children, Marjani offered her a helping hand. She believed kindness wasn't a gift, it was a duty. Atembo dreamed of one day buying a bigger boat so he could fish farther down the river, bringing back enough to feed not only his family, but the entire village. Marjani believed in his dream with all her heart. She imagined their future, a home filled with laughter, Zuri growing up to become a strong woman like her mother, and Atembo finally becoming the great fisherman he deserved to be. Life wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, full of love, hope, and the promise of a better tomorrow. The villagers respected Marjani and Atembo deeply. They were a symbol of everything good in Vumbaka: hard work, honesty, and compassion. People often said Marjani's heart was too big for her small home, but she would just laugh and say, "There's always room for more love." Little did she know, the world was about to test just how much pain that heart could endure. One night, the skies above Vumbaka turned dark and angry. The wind howled like a wounded animal, and the rain hammered down on the village in sheets. It wasn't just a storm. It was the kind of violent, unforgiving force that made even the bravest men lock their doors and pray for mercy. The river, usually calm and gentle, raged like a beast, swelling and churning, threatening to swallow everything in its path. Marjani begged Atembo to stay inside. She held his hand tightly, fear swimming in her eyes. But Atembo couldn't ignore the call of his duty. His boat, their only source of income, was tied near the riverbank, and if the storm took it, they would have nothing. He kissed Marjani's forehead softly, promising he'd be back soon. He told her not to worry, that he was strong enough to fight any storm, and then he was gone, swallowed by the night and the roaring wind. Marjani waited by the door, her heart pounding with each clap of thunder. Hours passed, but he didn't return. She refused to sleep, her eyes fixed on the path he had taken. When the sun rose, the storm finally died down, leaving the village in ruins. Trees had been ripped from the ground, roofs were torn away, and the river, the very lifeline of Vumbaka, had overflowed, leaving behind nothing but debris and despair. The villagers gathered by the riverbank, their faces pale with fear. Marjani ran to them, her voice shaking as she asked if anyone had seen Atembo. No one answered. They searched for hours, then days. It was on the third day that they found him. His body was tangled in the reeds downstream, his once strong arms limp, and his warm smile gone forever. The moment Marjani saw him, her knees buckled. It felt like the world had stopped spinning. The love of her life, the man who promised to come back to her, was gone. She screamed his name until her voice broke. The village mourned with her. Women wept, men lowered their heads in sorrow, and children who admired Atembo stood silently, not understanding why someone so full of life could be taken away. But Marjani's grief didn't get the chance to breathe. Mwanza, Atembo's father, stepped forward. He was a powerful man, an elder in the village whose voice carried weight. His face was carved from stone, cold and unfeeling. He didn't look at his son's lifeless body with sorrow. Instead, His eyes burned with something darker, blame. He pointed a shaking finger at Marjani, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. He called her a curse. He said Atembo's death was her fault, that she had brought misfortune to their family. He claimed she had poisoned his son with her bad luck, that no man as strong as Atembo would die unless he was doomed by a wicked woman. The crowd fell silent. No one dared to defend her. Mwanza was respected, feared even, and his word was law. Marjani's heart shattered again, this time in a way that felt even worse than losing Atembo. She wanted to scream, to tell them how much she loved him, how he died because he was brave, because he wanted to protect them, but her voice was gone. The grief choked her. Mwanza didn't stop. He told the village that Marjani's very presence was dangerous, that her bad luck would spread. He said Atembo's death was proof. He didn't just want her to suffer, he wanted her gone. The villagers looked at her with pity, but no one spoke up. No one challenged Mwanza. Marjani, once loved for her kindness, was now seen as a walking curse. Her friends, neighbors, people she had helped, couldn't even meet her eyes. Marjani stood there, numb and broken, her husband's lifeless body lying just feet away, and for the first time in her life she felt completely and utterly alone. The village had barely begun to recover from Atembo's death when Mwanza made his next move. Grief had turned to bitterness within him, and his anger boiled over like a pot left too long on the fire. He called a meeting of the village council, a gathering of the most respected elders, men who held the power to decide the fate of anyone in Vumbaka. The villagers gathered around, whispering among themselves, their eyes flicking between Marjani and Mwanza, unsure of what was about to happen. Mwanza stood tall, his voice loud and sharp, cutting through the murmurs. He spoke of his son, Atembo, praising his strength and courage, but then his voice turned cold and his eyes landed on Marjani. He didn't speak of her as his son's beloved wife or Zuri's mother. He called her a burden, a curse that had brought ruin upon their family. He claimed she was unworthy of the home Atembo had left behind, unworthy of bearing the family name. Marjani's heart pounded in her chest as his words filled the air. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but Mwanza gave her no chance. He told the council that if Marjani stayed, the curse she carried would only bring more death and misfortune. The council, most of them loyal to Mwanza or too afraid to oppose him, nodded in agreement. Then came the worst blow of all. Mwanza declared that Zuri, Marjani's light, her reason for living, would stay with him. He said the bloodline must be preserved, and a child with Atembo's blood didn't belong with a cursed woman. Marjani felt the ground shift beneath her. Her legs trembled and her throat tightened. She fell to her knees, her voice cracking as she begged Mwanza to let her stay with Zuri. She swore she wasn't a curse, that she loved Atembo more than life itself, that she would die before bringing harm to their daughter. Tears ran down her face as she reached for Zuri, who stood clutching her mother's hand, wide-eyed and confused. But Mwanza's face remained like stone, cold and unyielding. He didn't even look at her. His decision was final, and no amount of pleading could change it. He ordered her to leave the house immediately. Marjani could barely breathe as she tried one last time to reason with him, her voice shaking with desperation. She promised she would work harder, that she would live quietly, that she would never ask for anything. But Mwanza only turned his back on her, as though she didn't exist. The villagers watched in silence, their heads down. Some of them pitied her. She could see it in their eyes. But none of them dared to speak against Mwanza. He was too powerful, too feared. They didn't want to risk his wrath. Mwanza didn't stop there. He ordered his sons to throw Marjani's belongings out into the dirt, piece by piece. Her clothes, her baskets, even the small wooden carving Atembo had made for her on their wedding day. All of it was tossed carelessly onto the ground, as if her life meant nothing. Marjani's hands trembled as she picked up the carving, her tears blurring the world around her. Zuri cried out for her mother, trying to run to her, but Mwanza held her back, his grip firm. Marjani's heart shattered into pieces so small they could never be put back together again. She looked at the villagers one last time, silently begging for someone, anyone, to help her. But no one moved, no one spoke. They couldn't meet her eyes. With nothing left but the clothes on her back and a heart full of pain, Marjani stood up. Her body felt heavy, as though the weight of the entire world had settled on her shoulders. She took one last look at Zuri, her beautiful, innocent child, and whispered, "I will come back for you." Then, with her head held high, she walked away from the only home she had ever known, broken, betrayed, and alone. Marjani walked aimlessly, her bare feet dragging across the rough, unforgiving ground. The sun burned her skin during the day, and the cold night winds bit into her bones. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she couldn't stop. Each step felt heavier than the last, her heart weighed down by the image of Zuri's tear-streaked face. Her body ached, but the pain in her chest was worse. It wasn't just grief anymore, it was emptiness. Everything that made her life worth living had been ripped away. She was no longer a wife, no longer a mother, just a hollow shell wandering through the world. The land beyond Vumbaka was cruel. The ground was dry and cracked beneath her feet, and the air felt thick and dusty, making it hard to breathe. There were no familiar paths, no friendly faces. Each mile she walked seemed to pull her farther away from the life she once knew. Hunger clawed at her stomach, but she had nothing to eat. The few berries she found were bitter and made her throat burn, but she swallowed them anyway, desperate to silence the ache in her belly. At night, Marjani curled up beneath twisted, thorny trees, their branches scratching her skin like angry fingers. The ground was hard and cold, stealing what little warmth she had left. Sleep never came easily. Her mind wouldn't stop replaying the moment Mwanza tore Zuri from her arm. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Zuri reaching for her, crying for her, and she woke up gasping for air, her chest tight with panic. The days blurred together. The sun was relentless, beating down on her back, blistering her skin. Her lips cracked, and her throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. She stumbled across a muddy pond, the water thick and brown, but she didn't care. She dropped to her knees and scooped it into her mouth, ignoring the bitter taste and the dirt that stuck to her tongue. It didn't matter. Water was water. She drank until her stomach hurt, then collapsed beside the pond, her body too weak to move. Her once vibrant, beautiful clothes were now torn and stained with dirt. Her hair, which Atembo used to run his fingers through lovingly, was tangled and matted. She didn't recognize the woman she had become. She wasn't Marjani anymore. She was a ghost, drifting through a world that no longer wanted her. Days passed. She didn't know how many. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else, barely obeying her as she moved forward, one slow step at a time. She no longer looked for food. The hunger became part of her, a dull, constant ache that she learned to ignore. Her thoughts blurred. Sometimes she thought she heard Zuri's voice calling for her. Other times, she heard Atembo's laugh in the wind. She followed the voices, but they always disappeared, leaving her more alone than before. Eventually, her body gave up. Her legs buckled beneath her, and she collapsed near a rocky cliff overlooking Lake Shomari. The lake stretched out before her, shimmering under the sun like a distant dream, but it felt too far away. Everything felt too far away. Her arms shook as she tried to push herself up, but her strength was gone. Her head hit the dirt, and the world spun around her. Marjani didn't cry. She didn't have the energy. She stared at the lake through half-lidded eyes, her breath shallow and uneven. For a moment, she wondered if this was how it ended. Maybe it was better this way. Maybe if she died, she would find Atembo again, and he would hold her, and they could watch over Zuri together. Her vision blurred, the lake becoming nothing more than a smear of blue and gold. The last thing she remembered before darkness took her was the sound of the wind, whispering softly, almost like a lullaby. Marjani drifted somewhere between life and death, her body too weak to move, her mind trapped in a haze. She wasn't sure how long she lay there by the cliff, the sound of Lake Shomari's gentle waves in the distance. Her breathing was shallow, and the world felt distant, like she no longer belonged to it. She wondered if this was what dying felt like, slow, quiet, and empty. But then, through the fog of her mind, a sound reached her ears. It wasn't the wind or the rustle of leaves. It was singing, soft, melodic, and full of life. It felt warm, like sunlight breaking through a storm. The voices were unfamiliar, but the sound wrapped around her, pulling her back from the edge. Her eyes fluttered open, heavy and sore. Blurry figures moved around her, and the scent of something sweet, like honey and herbs, filled her nose. A man knelt beside her, his face weathered but kind, with eyes that held the warmth of a flickering fire. His name was Quito, a leader of a group of nomadic traders. He spoke gently, telling her she was safe now. Marjani didn't have the strength to respond, but tears pricked her eyes. Safe. It was a word she hadn't felt in so long. Quito and his people carried her to their camp, where they laid her beneath a canopy of brightly coloured cloth. They gave her water, spooned warm broth between her cracked lips, and tended to the sores on her feet. Every day, Quito sat by her side, speaking to her softly, even when she couldn't answer. It took time, longer than she expected, but slowly, Marjani's body began to heal. The hollowness in her stomach eased, and her strength returned bit by bit. Quito's people treated her like one of their own. They never asked who she was or where she came from. They only cared that she was alive, and that was enough. As the days turned into weeks, Marjani began to learn more about the people who saved her. They weren't from any one place. They travelled from village to village, trading beautiful crafts for food and supplies. Quito himself was a skilled craftsman, known for carving intricate patterns into wood and stone. Marjani watched him work for hours, mesmerized by the way his hands moved with such care and precision. One day, as she sat watching him polish a smooth, deep blue stone from the lake, Quito placed it in her hand. He smiled and told her, "You have a survivor's spirit. Maybe your hands are meant to create too." His words stirred something deep inside her, something she thought had died along with a tembo. Slowly, she began to work alongside Quito and his people. They taught her how to weave vibrant fabrics, using dyes made from wildflowers that bloomed near the lake. She learned to string delicate jewelry from rare stones they collected, each one holding a different shade of the water's brilliance. Marjani's hands, once rough and broken, found new purpose. The pain inside her didn't disappear, but creating something beautiful helped soothe it. Each thread she wove, each stone she polished, felt like stitching a piece of herself back together. Her work became extraordinary. The villagers in nearby settlements began to notice. Quito took her creations to trade, and word spread quickly. People marveled at the vibrant fabrics and the jewelry that seemed to hold the very colors of Lake Shamari within them. They said the pieces felt alive, as though they carried a story. Quito smiled when he returned from the villages, his hands full of food and supplies, traded for Marjani's work. He told her that people weren't just buying her crafts, they were asking for them by name. Her talent had bloomed into something bigger than she ever imagined. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Marjani didn't feel like a ghost anymore. She wasn't a curse, or a widow, or a woman cast out. She was Marjani, a creator, a survivor, and a woman with a spark of hope burning inside her once again. The pain of her past didn't vanish, but it transformed into something powerful, a driving force that pushed her forward. With Quito's guidance and the support of his people, Marjani's skills flourished. Her crafts weren't just beautiful, they were alive with emotion and resilience, and people could feel that in every piece. As the seasons passed, her work became more than just a way to survive. Villagers no longer waited for Quito's caravans to bring her creations. They sought them out. Her jewelry, made from the shimmering lake stones, became a symbol of strength and hope. The vibrant fabrics she wove, dyed with wildflowers, were worn by women who admired not just the beauty, but the story behind them. Marjani realized that her journey couldn't end with simply surviving. She wanted more, not just for herself, but for others who had suffered like she once did. She dreamed of a place where no woman would be cast out or broken by grief, a place where they could rebuild their lives, just as she had. With the profits from her growing trade, Marjani made a bold decision. She no longer wanted to follow the road with Quito's caravan. She wanted to create something permanent, a home, a sanctuary. She returned to the place where she had almost died, near the cliffs by Lake Shamari. But this time, she wasn't broken. She was stronger than ever. She built a settlement there, one that would welcome anyone who needed a fresh start. It wasn't just a camp or a marketplace. It was a new beginning. She named it Zuriani Market, after her daughter Zuri, who remained the light guiding her forward. Every stone, every tent, and every vibrant banner in the market held her daughter's name in spirit, a promise that one day they would be reunited. Word spread quickly. Merchants from faraway lands, drawn by the legend of Marjani's crafts, came to Zuriani Market to trade. The market buzzed with life. Colourful stalls lined the paths, filled with fabrics, jewellery, spices, and goods from distant villages. Music and laughter filled the air, blending with the scent of roasting meats and sweet fruits. What was once an empty, barren place now thrived with hope and opportunity. But Marjani didn't stop there. She remembered what it felt like to be abandoned, helpless, and cast out. She found other women like her, widows, abandoned wives, and mothers with no place to go. She gave them work, teaching them the skills Quito once taught her. Each woman became a craftswoman, a merchant, or a trader. They no longer begged for food or feared the night. They held their heads high, earning their keep with their own hands. Marjani didn't see them as workers. She saw them as sisters, and together they formed a family. Their laughter echoed through the market streets, stronger than the pain they once carried. People no longer spoke of Marjani as the cursed widow of Vumbaka. They spoke of her as the woman who rose from nothing, the woman who built a village from ashes and gave life to those who had none. She wasn't a shadow of her past anymore. She was a force of nature, unstoppable and unwavering. The market flourished, becoming one of the largest trade centers in the region. Caravans from distant lands carried stories of the woman who had defied fate and built an empire with her own two hands. They spoke of Zuriani Market, the place where broken souls found new beginnings and forgotten women became queens of their own destinies. Marjani would often stand at the edge of the lake, watching the sun dip below the horizon. She imagined Zuri's face in the sunset's glow, her heart aching but hopeful. She whispered to the wind, "I'm still coming for you, my love. I will find you." She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a legend, a mother, a leader, and a woman who rose from the ashes. Marjani sat at the edge of Lake Shamari, the wind gently tugging at her richly embroidered robes. The sun glinted off the rings on her fingers, each one carved from the very lake stones that once felt like her only lifeline. She was no longer the broken, abandoned widow who wandered the desert. She was a leader now, a merchant queen with a thriving trade empire and a market that bore her daughter's name. But no matter how far she had come, one place still haunted her heart: Vumbaka, the village that cast her out, stole her child, and left her for dead. It was time to return, not in mourning, but in power. Her caravan was a sight to behold. Silk banners, dyed in brilliant reds, golds, and blues, fluttered against the wind. Wagons overflowed with rare treasures, finely woven fabrics, shimmering jewelry, spices from distant lands, and ornate carvings crafted by the very women she had lifted from ruin. Guards, strong and proud, rode alongside her, their spears gleaming in the sun. At the front of it all was Marjani, sitting tall atop a majestic white horse, her head held high. As they approached Vumbaka, the once familiar dirt roads felt smaller than she remembered. The village, which had once been her whole world, now seemed so ordinary compared to the bustling, colourful life she had built. But still, her heart raced, not with fear, but with anticipation. The villagers heard the rumble of wheels and hooves before they saw her. Children ran ahead, eyes wide with wonder at the spectacle. One by one, people emerged from their homes, squinting into the sunlight as the grand caravan rolled in. Their murmurs grew louder, confusion giving way to awe. When Marjani finally entered the village square, the crowd fell silent. Women who once turned their backs on her now stared, mouths open. Men who once whispered behind her back looked down, ashamed. And at the center of it all stood Mwanza, her father-in-law, the man who had thrown her out like she was nothing. His face, once so cold and unforgiving, now looked pale with shock. Marjani didn't speak right away. She let the silence stretch, let them all take her in. Her once frail body now held strength and grace. Her eyes, once filled with grief, now burned with determination. The woman they pitied was gone, replaced by someone they could barely recognize. Finally she spoke, her voice calm but powerful, carrying through the hushed crowd. "I am Marjani," she said. "You cast me out. You called me a curse. You took my daughter from me, but I did not die. I rose. I built a life from nothing. And now I return not as the woman you left in the dirt, but as the woman you cannot ignore." The weight of her words hung in the air. No one dared to speak. Marjani looked at Mwanza, meeting his eyes without fear. He looked away first. The villagers didn't see a widow anymore. They saw a woman who had survived the worst they could do to her and came back stronger than any of them. Some lowered their heads in shame. Others stared in awe, unable to believe the woman before them was the same Marjani they had once cast aside. Marjani didn't stay to hear their apologies or excuses. She didn't need them. She turned her horse around, her silk banners rippling behind her like flames. The crowd parted without a word, watching in stunned silence as she and her caravan rode out, leaving Vumbaka behind. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her future was no longer there. It was waiting for her at Zuriani Market, where she belonged. The crowd was still buzzing with murmurs as Marjani's caravan came to a halt in the heart of Vumbaka. People stared, unable to believe the woman who once walked among them, broken and humiliated, had returned in such splendor. Silk banners waved in the wind. Guards stood tall, and treasures from distant lands glimmered in the sunlight. Marjani, dressed in flowing robes of deep blue and gold, looked every bit like a queen. Among the crowd, a hunched, frail figure sat by the edge of the road, his clothes torn and face hollow. It was Mwanza, the once powerful village elder who had cast Marjani out. Time had not been kind to him. His body looked withered, his voice weak as he extended a trembling hand toward the caravan. "Please," he rasped, barely loud enough to be heard. "Food, water, anything." Marjani didn't recognize him at first. He was just another beggar in the crowd. But then, as her eyes settled on his face, realization hit her like a jolt of lightning. The man who had ripped her life apart, who had stolen her daughter and condemned her to die, now knelt in the dirt, powerless and forgotten by the very people he once ruled over. He didn't recognize her. Marjani stared at him for a long moment, her heart a storm of emotions, pity, anger, and something deeper, a hollow ache that no amount of success had ever truly erased. Slowly, she stepped down from her grand carriage, her silk robes trailing behind her. The crowd hushed, their eyes fixed on her. She walked towards Mwanza, her voice steady, but filled with the weight of everything he had done to her. "Do you remember me, Mwanza?" she asked, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "The woman you threw into the dirt, the woman you called a curse." Mwanza's head jerked up, his cloudy eyes narrowing as he stared at her. For a moment he looked confused. Then his face changed. His eyes widened with shock, and his mouth opened in disbelief. "Marjani," he whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. His face went pale, the color draining from his weathered skin. He looked like he had seen a ghost. Marjani didn't flinch. She didn't look away. "Yes," she said firmly. "It's me, the woman you threw out like garbage, the woman you blamed for your son's death, the woman you called a curse." Mwanza's legs gave out beneath him, and he collapsed to his knees in the dirt. His hands trembled as he reached for her, his voice shaking. "Please, forgive me," he choked out. "I was wrong. I was blinded by grief. I lost everything. They turned on me. The village, they cast me out too." His voice cracked. "I have nothing now. I'm sorry, Marjani. I'm so sorry." Marjani stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. This was the man who had destroyed her life, and now he was on his knees, broken and begging. For a moment, the weight of it all pressed down on her. She could humiliate him. She could turn her back and leave him to suffer the way he had left her. The crowd watched in silence, waiting to see what she would do. Marjani took a slow, deep breath. The pain in her chest softened. She wasn't the woman he cast out anymore. She was stronger than that. Without a word, she turned to one of her guards and gestured toward the food and water in the caravan. "Feed him," she said quietly. The crowd gasped. Mwanza stared at her in disbelief, his eyes filling with tears. "You're not a curse," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You're a blessing." Marjani didn't respond. She turned and walked back to her caravan, leaving Mwanza on his knees, weeping in the dirt. The crowd held its breath, eyes locked on Marjani. They waited, expecting her to deliver a punishment as cruel as the fate Mwanza once forced upon her. Whispers rippled through the villages, some hoping for revenge, others wondering if this powerful woman would finally make him pay. Mwanza, frail and trembling in the dirt, couldn't meet her eyes. His body shook not from the cold, but from fear and shame. He had once stood tall, a man feared and respected. Now he was nothing more than a shadow of that man, broken and begging for mercy. Marjani stared at him, her heart pounding. Every memory of pain, every night spent starving and alone, every tear shed for her stolen daughter flashed through her mind. The weight of it all was unbearable, and yet, as she looked at the pitiful man before her, something unexpected filled her chest. It wasn't anger, it wasn't hate, it was sorrow. Slowly, Marjani knelt beside him. The crowd gasped. They leaned in, waiting for her to speak. Her voice, steady and clear, cut through the thick silence. "Hate nearly destroyed me," she said softly, her words carrying through the square. "But love rebuilt me." Mwanza blinked up at her, his eyes glassy and bewildered. "I forgive you," Marjani said, her voice unwavering. The crowd fell so silent that even the wind seemed to hold its breath. For a moment, no one moved, no one spoke. The villagers stared, stunned, as Marjani reached out and gently lifted Mwanza from the dirt. He was light, far lighter than she remembered, his body weak and fragile. Tears slipped down his sunken cheeks. His voice broke. "I don't deserve your mercy." Marjani's expression didn't waver. "Mercy isn't given because someone deserves it," she said quietly. "It's given because someone chooses it. I choose to be better than the pain you gave me. I choose to end this cycle." Without hesitation, she gestured to her caravan. "Bring him food, shelter, and medicine. He will not suffer while I stand." The crowd erupted, but not in outrage. Cheers, loud and thunderous, filled the air. People clapped, shouted her name, and some even wept. They weren't celebrating Mwanza. They were celebrating her. Her strength, her compassion, her heart. "She's stronger than all of us," an old woman murmured, her voice choked with emotion. "She's the true leader of Vumbaka," a man called out, and the crowd roared in agreement. The title that once belonged to Mwanza was now spoken with Marjani's name, not because she demanded it, but because the people gave it willingly. She hadn't won their hearts through fear or power. She had won them through grace. Mwanza stared at her, his face full of disbelief and gratitude. He couldn't speak. He simply bowed his head, tears streaming down his cheeks. Marjani didn't linger to watch him weep. She rose to her feet, her robes billowing in the breeze, and turned to face the village. Her heart felt lighter than it had in years. The weight of her past didn't chain her anymore. It lifted her higher. She didn't come back to destroy Vumbaka. She came back to show them what true strength looked like. And as the crowd cheered her name, Marjani knew one thing for certain. She wasn't just the woman who survived. She was the woman who won. Marjani stood at the edge of Vumbaka, the sun casting a warm glow over the village that once cast her out. The cheers still echoed in her mind, but none of it mattered compared to the one thing her heart ached for most, her daughter. From the crowd, a figure emerged. Zuri, no longer the little girl Marjani was forced to leave behind, but a young woman, strong, beautiful, and full of life. Her eyes, though older and wiser, still held the same light Marjani remembered. "Mother!" Zuri's voice cracked with emotion as she ran. Marjani's breath caught in her throat. Her arms opened, and the moment they collided, it felt like the entire world disappeared. Tears spilled freely as they held each other, sobbing into each other's shoulders. Years of pain, longing, and hope melted away in that one embrace. "I missed you," Zuri whispered, her voice trembling. I never stopped loving you, Marjani choked out, holding her tighter. Not for a second. The villagers watched in silence, their hearts moved by the reunion. Mothers held their children closer, and even the toughest men wiped their eyes. It wasn't just Marjani's victory. It felt like a moment of healing for the whole village. In the days that followed, Marjani and Zuri worked side by side to reshape Vumbaka. The village was no longer ruled by fear or cruelty. Together, they made sure no woman or child would ever suffer the way they had. Abandoned wives, orphans and outcasts found refuge in Zuriani Market, the thriving trade hub Marjani built in her daughter's name. Zuri, full of ideas and compassion, helped her mother create programs to teach women skills, weaving, pottery, jewelry making, anything that could give them independence and dignity. The market flourished, and with it, the village began to grow. Kito, the kind-hearted craftsman who once saved Marjani from death, remained by her side. He became more than a friend. He was family now. His wisdom and connections helped expand their trade to distant lands. Caravans travelled far beyond Vumbaka, carrying their goods to bustling cities and distant villages. Their name became known not just for the beauty of their crafts, but for the story behind them. A story of resilience, mercy, and triumph. Kito would often laugh, saying, "Marjani, you didn't just build a market, you built a kingdom of second chances." And he was right. Marjani no longer saw the woman who had once wandered the desert, broken and starving. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a mother, a leader, a survivor. But more than that, she saw hope. As the sun set over Vumbaka, Marjani stood with Zuri and Kito by her side, watching the village come alive with laughter and life. This wasn't just a new beginning for her, it was a new beginning for everyone.